Good afternoon, I'm Gigi Go. We're speaking with Jonathan Malaya today. He is the Executive Director of the PDP Laban Federalism Institute. It's a think tank of President Rodrigo Duterte's party. It has been in consultation with governance experts, political parties, and lawyers here and abroad for the past year to come up with a draft constitution that will govern the Philippines if we turn federal. And PDP Laban Institute has submitted this draft constitution to Congress and have been in discussion with congressmen in the past 2 weeks about the details of this proposal. Jonathan will fill us in on what exactly the administration is proposing. Hi, Jonathan. Thank
Hello,
you for
Gigi.
joining us on Rappler Talk.
Yeah, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So you have discussed with the technical working groups, 4 of them in Congress, the proposed form of government so far and the powers and responsibilities of the proposed regions or states and how the autonomous regions will be funded. What are the major points raised by congressmen so far?
Well, we really had to work with them very closely because some of them really have no idea of the entire federal system of government. So we had to explain to them the context of what we're doing in the Philippines. First, I had to tell them that there's a different context of federalism in the Philippines as opposed to other countries like in Germany, which we visited. These were formerly independent states, came together and formed the German Union, and the same with the US. No? So when these states came together, they already had attributes of sovereignty, for example. And I explained to the members of Congress that in our case, since we are a holding together federalism, being a unitary, wishing to go federal, the
It's
context
the
of dual,
reverse.
it's a reverse in the context of dual sovereignty, which would people expect in a federal system, cannot be made in the Philippines because we have a different context. The second context which we explained to them was, we're not here to supplant in its entirety the 87 Constitution. Our opinion is a lot of good provisions, there are a lot of good provisions in the 87 Constitution, and therefore we should just choose those provisions which we feel is important to move the country forward. We appreciate the 87 Constitution. It allowed us to move from authoritarianism during the Marcos era and to proceed and then move on. But we feel that at this stage in our country's history, it has to yield to some amendments so that we can compete in the globalized economy. And the third thing that we always mention to the members of Congress is that there is no one size fits all in the federal system. There are no strict criteria that if we go federal, our system must be like this. The system which we adopt should respond to the needs and aspirations of our country and should be reflective of our political culture. So, given that, we're proposing, we submitted to Congress that model which we submitted, which we hope that they will seriously consider, and uphold the public interest.
You mentioned about now not entirely revising the current constitution. I think the public has to be, informed about it because they thinking that when you submit a draft constitution, it's totally new. And then maybe tell us what are some of the features of the current constitution that you propose to retain and what are the ones you propose to revise?
We're focusing really on 3 articles, 6, 7, and 10.
Okay.
6, 7 is the executive branch and the legislative branch of government and the local governments. And the local government section would now be the section of the regional governments in our proposal. We have some very minor changes in the other parts of the Constitution. Like, for example, national territory, we want to ensure that the UNCLOS is reflected in our Constitution, so the exclusive economic zone must be indicated there, and also places wherein we have historical right or claim. In the judiciary, we're proposing, for example, regional appellate courts in all of the regions to be created under the federal Constitution, so as to ensure access to justice by those in the provinces, because we recognize that when they need to appeal, they have to go all the way to Manila or Cebu or Cagayan de Oro. So some minor changes. The other major changes are lifting the cap on foreign ownership of the economic provisions, no, with respect to restrictive nationalized activities in the Constitution. So we agree that instead of putting that in the Constitution, we would rather that Parliament be given the power to revise those provisions so as to make the provisions flexible rather than put the restrictive provisions in the Constitution. So it's mostly the form of government and some minor changes in the other parts of the Constitution.
People are asking about what happens to the president under the proposal.
Yes. In our consultations, the country has a very strong affinity to the president. People cannot imagine a time when we won't have a president.
Or that they won't be able to directly elect
Or
president.
they won't be able. No, it's a part and parcel of our political culture. We've had the president since 1898. So rather than mess with that, because that's part of our political culture, we retain the president. So we propose the adoption of a semi-presidential system. A semi-presidential system is similar to the ones in Taiwan, South Korea, Portugal, and to a certain extent, France. No?
Yeah.
So it's not a new system. It's practiced around the world, so there are some best practices we can bring into the Philippine experience. So to answer your question, our proposal is to retain the president. Again, he will be nationally elected, but he will be the only nationally elected official now.
No more vice president.
Theoretically, there would be no need for a vice president under this system because it is a semi-parliamentary system. If ever there is the death of the president, the Senate president or the prime minister can take over as acting president until special elections are called. However, in our discussions with Senate President Coco Pimentel, he said that if the Filipino people in the consultations would want to retain a vice president, then we should elect the vice president and retain it, but elect the vice president in tandem with the president.
Yeah.
The proposal being ticket.
Ticket, yes.
Just like what they do in the United States where they vote for Trump and Pence all at the same time. And if we do retain the vice president, we should give the vice president a clear task or responsibility as opposed to now.
Unlike now.
Yeah. Unlike now when there is practically nothing in the Constitution that defines what a vice president is supposed to be except to succeed in case the president dies. So our proposal is to follow the US system wherein the vice president is the presiding officer of the Senate.
And in your consultations, has this been brought up, if the public wants just a president or a vice president?
Yes, we did. But when we explained the model, which is a semi-presidential with the prime minister, many of them were of the opinion that we don't need the position of vice president anymore. So, but that's not conclusive. That's just in several consultations that we have conducted.
Yeah, because under the federal system, you're proposing the executive powers will be exercised by the prime minister.
Yes.
Yeah. He has most of the tasks being done by the president now will be done by the
That's right.
prime minister.
Because our concept of the president is an elder statesman, an elder statesman who is insulated from day-to-day politics. The president today, as you know, our president is a winner-take-all president who has the baggage of the entire country. He takes care of practically anything. If there's a problem with traffic, he's concerned. If there's a problem with the mautay, everything is his problem. Our idea for the president under this federal constitution is a president who does not handle the money and a president who is above politics, who is decisive leader in times of crisis, who deals with foreign governments. That's why he is the chief diplomat, and who handles the armed forces.
Yes.
That
So
will be his role.
armed forces and foreign affairs.
That's right. And if there is gridlock in parliament, which is possible because we still have to evolve a strong political party system, then with the president, with the national mandate, he can be the one to bring the parties together and ensure that the business of government is done. On the other hand, the prime minister will handle the day-to-day affairs of government, and we do not, if we want to change the prime minister, we don't need to go through a coup d'etat anymore or a people power revolution, because a prime minister in a parliamentary system can be removed by a vote of no confidence.
Yeah, and then the lawmakers among themselves to elect
Yes,
a new prime
yes,
minister.
and um, the the process is the president gets to nominate the prime minister, and with the consent of the Federal Assembly, appoints the prime minister.
Okay. The Federal Assembly you're proposing is similar to our House of Representatives now. And then what will happen to the Senate under your proposal?
The Senate, we're also going through some changes in the Senate because, as you very well know, having seen how our legislature acts, what the Senate does and the House does are practically the same.
Yeah, nagdodoble.
The doble. So, for example, on the anti-hazing law, you will see the Senate calling witnesses to amend the anti-hazing law and the Horacio Castillo case, and you have the House doing the same. It's the duplication of functions, really. Our proposal is to make the Senate, rather than a complete duplication of the powers of the House, we make the Senate as a final check on bills and resolutions passed by the House. This is something akin to a House of Lords, no? Or a Senate in other parliamentary democracies in the world. The role of the Senate will be to check against haphazardly passed legislation.
Okay, so
Or-
we still have the 3 readings passed in the House, and then they move it to the Senate,
And then it goes only through one reading.
okay, 1 reading.
So that expedites legislation. No. But the Senate is not entirely inutile here, because the Senate can say, oh, we don't like the bill, return it back to the Senate with comments. To the Federal Assembly. So there is a process wherein the Senate can propose legislation, but it cannot initiate legislation.
That's the difference.
That's a big difference. Really the role of the Senate is simply to review laws passed by the Parliament before it's submitted to the President.
For signature. It's
For
still
his
the
signature.
President signing the laws.
Yes.
And what powers will be retained by the Senate under this proposal?
Yes. Practically, besides legislation, all the other powers are retained. As a matter of fact, we're proposing that the Commission on Appointments be entirely abolished, and the confirming power of the CA now be transferred to the Senate, rather than
alone,
a bicameral chamber, Senate alone. But only in cases when the cabinet member is not a member of parliament. Because what we did was we saw in a lot of countries that their ministers are not necessarily all coming from parliament. We saw that some of the prime ministers wanted a technocrat, no, or a professional from the private sector to serve, for example, as Minister of Trade. We allowed that in our draft. What we propose is that at least 50% must come from members of parliament, but the rest can come from the private sector. So in case a nominee for minister is from the private sector, then he must undergo confirmation,
Only by the Senate.
and only this time by the
And
Senate.
the impeachment powers.
Yes, the impeachment powers are retained. The power to approve treaties and international agreements is retained, and the power of the impeachment court is also retained.
But you propose to change the way senators will be elected.
Yes, because we would like the Philippines to go back to the old system. If looking back at the history of the Senate, before we elected our senators by regions, no? We want to go back to that system to ensure representation of the entire country. If you look at the composition of the Senate now, only 3 are coming from Mindanao. No? And there are many places in the Philippines, like Ilocos region, who do not have representation in the Senate. Eastern Visayas has no representation in the Senate. There's many places in the Philippines have no representation. So our proposal is to make it regional. And also another additional work that we propose for the Senate is that rather than a judicial and bar council going through the screening process for members of the judiciary, it will now be the Senate who will do that, so that it's transparent. A lot of questions have been raised against the JBC being a very inclusive and exclusive group, no, whose activities are not open to public scrutiny. We propose that the power of nominating the members of the judiciary should come from the Senate, so that everybody gets to know who these nominees are.
But the concerns of congressmen so far about at least the parts that you've already discussed with the technical working groups, what are these, if any?
Well, the concern of members of Congress, the major concerns are with relation to the composition of Congress. We propose that we increase the number of members of Congress, or the members of Parliament in this case, from the present 250 to 400. Majority will still be coming from single-member districts. No? So there will be no change in the districts. What the districts are right now will remain. We propose that because we would like to have as much as little of disruption as possible in the shift to a federal system of government. The other 40%, we propose a proportional representation system, which is an improvement on the party list. No?
Which is actually the original intent of the party list system.
That's right. That's right. And I'm happy that you're familiar with that, because the party list members of Congress are somehow apprehensive of the PR system because many of them said that, you know, this has gone through the Supreme Court so many times. There's already a gamut of jurisprudence here. Why should we change it?
Yeah, and the Supreme Court's latest decision is that it's a system of proportional representation. It's not exclusive to the marginalized sectors.
There you go. But what the Supreme Court also did not clarify here, I think, is that mainstream political parties are still prohibited from joining the party list system. The original PR system, I think, which was envisioned under the 87 Constitution, which was patterned after the PR system in other parliamentary democracies, is that it's a tool really for amalgamation of political parties. It's also really a tool to strengthen political parties. No? And when I say strengthen political parties, I'm referring not to party list groups, but to mainstream political parties. Because it's been a bane of Philippine politics that we have very weak and very fragmented political party system. If we reserve 40% of Congress to the PR system, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many of the experts who have given their thought to this, in particular the Federalism Study Group, no, which came out with this proposal to Congress, that it would actually strengthen the political party system, because we will not be voting for sectors, we will be actually voting for political parties. Now, it's now the role of the political parties to strengthen the sectors within the parties, just like in other democracies we're in. In the US, for example, there's the Republican youth, Republican labor, Republican professionals, and there are sectors within the political parties. That should be where the sectors are represented, not in Congress per se. I think what has happened is our party list groups are now representing such diverse groups of sectors.
And they split the vote in the same sector.
In the same sector. I was discussing this, for example, with people from Bayan Muna, no? Because our party list system has a limit as a 3-seat limit as a cap. So what they do in order to get more seats is that they divide their groups
so you
into
have Gabriela and
the youth, or around 6 or 7 groups, and even ACT teachers has spinned off from Bayan Muna to represent. Under the PR system, they don't need to spin off. They will be one block.
Yeah.
They can participate as one block.
And
They become a mainstream political party.
Exactly.
And the party list, what is now referred to as the party list within this, becomes sectors of a large political party.
So Bayan Muna becomes the political party, and
Yes.
then it can get as many seats
That's right.
as possible depending on the vote.
Depending on the vote. And they can negotiate now, because if we're shifting to a parliamentary system, they can negotiate now. They can become they may continue to be a small group in comparison to the other groups, but they become a very strong group, because if either of the major political parties do not get an outright majority, yeah, just like what happened in Germany with CDU, or in the United Kingdom, wherein Theresa May wasn't able to get, he had to work with small political parties. In the case of CDU, they now have to work with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats to be able to form a working coalition in Parliament.
Okay. When you're proposing autonomous regions, the the concern is that well, the concern is that it might strengthen the political dynasties. So you are also proposing to like ban the political dynasties, and unlike in the current constitution that needs
Enabling legislation.
enabling law,
Mhm.
kaya the dynasties are still here.
Mhm.
Your proposal is the new constitution will be self-executing
That's right.
regarding this matter.
That's right, yeah.
What's the reaction of the congressmen who mostly belong to political parties?
Of course, there's been some negative reaction from them. No, they argue that it's not needed because in any case they're elected. Though it's true that they come from political parties, their contention is it's still the people that decides. No, but in the point of view of the Federalism Institute, no, and I also discussed this with many of our party officials, is that it's about time that we give flesh to the provision of the 87 Constitution that we ban political dynasties. Why? Because we want to democratize access to public service. No? The Dr. Ronald Mendoza's study in the Ateneo School of Government has shown that practically every province has a dynasty there. No? We want to democratize it. No? So what we did is we made a proposal in the Constitution. The Constitution should provide already the parameters of what a political dynasty is and what are prohibited. So we defined it as a member of a political party or a relative of a incumbent politician within the second degree of affinity or consanguinity will be prohibited from running in the same territory. So if, for example, the father is already a governor, then his relatives up to the second civil degree will not be able to run in the province. But in the next province, yes, of course. Or if someone else runs for president, they are allowed.
So my son is not allowed to run in my district or province, but my cousin can run in my district or my province?
Yes.
Okay. But
Yes.
my son can run in the next province?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so
You know,
compromiso.
we were looking for a compromise here, something more palatable to our politicians, because we would rather that we have something rather than nothing. We've had nothing for the past 30 years, so at least this is a step in that direction. Also, we're not very strict as to succession. So, for example, the certain politician has served for 3 terms already. We will not prohibit the son or the wife or from running in the same position. Because these are 2 different individuals anyway. What we're concerned more is the concentration of political power all at the same time
Within a family?
within a family in the same territorial jurisdiction. I think that is, to our opinion, not a good way of public service. But the succession, I think we can live with that.
But there's another difficult matter that you have to deal with this, because under the proposals, there will be no provincial governors anymore. You are removing the provincial level?
No, we're not. Maybe some other proposal. That's another proposal.
So under your proposal, we have a regional government, and then what's the next level of local government?
It's the provinces.
Do you still have the provinces?
Yes,
Okay.
we're still up.
But what will be the changes?
Well, it's an ongoing debate really on whether we should maintain the provinces. Our opinion, yes. We wish to retain the provinces because provinces are part and parcel of the cultural identity of a certain individual. I know you're from Cavite. If you remove the provincial government, Cavite becomes
Just Southern Tagalog.
just a place, no? It doesn't have anything. So I don't think the Caviteños or the Patangueños will agree that their provincial governments are abolished under a federal system. And even when we went to Germany, and if you look at the United States, it doesn't look. It's not very apparent, but under the state, there's the county, and there's a county commissioner before you go to the mayor of the town or city. So the county apparently is the province
The
in the
province.
Philippines, no?
But will there be, I don't know, will there be changes in the powers and responsibilities because you're adding another
Yes.
level of
Yes,
governance.
yes, there will be. But that will have to be defined more by the Organic Act, which will be passed per region. Our concept of the regional government is not a very strong or bureaucratic regional government. It's lean regional government because we realize that the shift to federalism will entail cost. No? So to us, the regional government at the beginning should be lean. So it should not go immediately into a spending spree, which is why we propose first that we go to a regional commission stage before we go to a regular regional government stage.
The regional commission is not elected.
They're elected as provincial governors.
The provincial governors will be
Yes.
in the regional commission. So it's
Yes.
like our regional development councils now.
Yes, but the problem with the RDCs now is they practically have no power
Powers,
except to
yeah.
recommend. Our proposal is to give legislative and executive power to the regional commission, which is to
Okay.
be created under the federal constitution.
Okay. And then when these regional governments are created, you're giving it 5 to 10 years to come up with an organic act. So it's like we federalize, but the shift to being autonomous will not happen at the same time, but within the same period.
Yes,
Okay.
because there's a lot of moving parts, and we don't want public service to be affected just because of the shift of federalism. To us, federalism should improve public service. If it doesn't, let's not go through it anymore. We thought about a slow transition to federalism because we looked back at the experience in 1991 when we passed the local government code. When we passed it, overnight, control over the district hospitals were transferred from the DOH to the local governments. And the local governments found it so hard to run hospitals. They had no expertise. Suddenly, they have barangay health workers and nurses under them. They had no money to pay for the hospital expenses and for the operations of these hospitals. And there were a lot of moves to renationalize those
The
hospitals. No? So learning from that experience, that's only one sector, no? Learning from that experience. And here we are talking about a gamut of public service. No? We're talking about housing to be devolved to regional governments. We're talking about fire, public safety and fire department to be given to local governments. We're talking about irrigation to be given to local governments. So there are a lot of moving parts. No? Our concept is, anyway, we can wait. No, we've been with the unitary system for so long. People can wait a little bit longer to have this. It's better to wait and do it slowly than do it abruptly and affect public service.
I think another concern is what will happen to the bureaucracy. What happens to the employees of national government agencies when you suddenly, break up into regional governments?
Yes. Many of the national government agencies will be affected, of course, but there is a mechanism. No? That's why we're doing it slowly. For example, the Department of Education. Our proposal is not to totally break the Department of Education to smaller pieces and give them to the regions. Although in a federal system, education has always been a local concern.
Yeah.
Since we have a different context, we can do it differently. Our proposal is we have a Department of Education on the national level who will do the curriculum. So we have a standard curriculum across the country, and we have the same textbooks across the country. But the purchase of those textbooks will now be done on the regional level, so that if the bidding in Manila fails, not the entire country suffers. People in Bicol or people in Mindanao continue to have their textbooks even if the bidding in Metro Manila fails. Now, but the teachers will no longer get their salaries from the national government. They will now be devolved to the regions. So there will be no massive displacement because they will just change bosses.
Okay.
From the Secretary of Education, they will now transfer it to the regional director. So it will just be a change in reporting duties.
Okay.
the Department of Education will still be there to do oversight.
Lean central office.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Lean Central Office.
So nobody will be forced to retire. They will just be transferred to regional
Yes.
offices.
If we do it properly, no one will be forced to retire. Because I was discussing it, for example, with the housing sector and even the health sector. We were saying, PhilHealth doesn't need to be divided into smaller pieces because PhilHealth, as a national agency, is stronger, has more money if it is on a national scale. What will have to be devolved are the hospitals, no, if they have not yet been devolved. I don't think we need to devolve the PGH or the tertiary hospitals run by the DOH. They can stay where they are. In housing, I can foresee that the National Housing Authority will be divided because housing is a basic concern and therefore should be run by the regional government. But the GFIs of the housing sector, like Pag-ibig, they need not be divided into smaller sectors. So if we do it that way, there will be a little bit less disruption than expected. So looking at what we're proposing right now, there's really nothing to fear in terms of the bureaucracy.
And all these details will be in the draft, in the new constitution. Will this be spelled out, or will it be left to some other body or agency to like thresh out the
Unfortunately, we cannot put all the details there.
It's codified.
Because if we do that, we will have the longest constitution in the world.
We have the longest one right now. So.
And so we're going to make it longer.
So, I mean, I guess the question is, how do we ensure that these details that reassures the public about not very disruptive changes will actually be put in place?
Well, the first thing that has to be done is to ensure that the intent of Congress is clear. If it's con-con or a con-as, the intent has to be clear. So, if it's recorded, if that is recorded, no, that will serve as a guide when you implement the provisions of the Constitution. That's the first, the intent of Congress when they propose the amendments. But the second most important is Congress must do it properly when they make the regional and local government code.
Yeah.
The regional local government code will replace the existing 3 or 4 books of the local government code. That is really the meat of federalism here. The Constitution can only contain the basic principles and the skeleton of a federal system. The details, like what we discussed, can only be contained in the regional and local government code. And to our mind, that should be the first thing that Parliament must pass within the first or second regular session of the new Congress or new Parliament once it convenes. Immediately, they should pass that because we cannot shift to a regional system without the regional and local government code.
Will your Federalism Institute be drafting that regional
No.
government code also?
I don't think so. I think that's very tough job. I think it should be done by a code commission or something.
But you don't mind taking part in that because you've started with the draft constitution anyway.
If asked, I'd be happy to assist in doing that.
But do we have time for this? I mean, what's your timeline about coming up with the final draft that both houses of Congress approve and the plebiscite to ratify it and the transition itself? People are saying, some people are saying, why are we rushing this? But some people are saying, we've been talking about this for a long time, so when are we going to do this? So give us a timeline. I know it's a long process of consultations and all, but do we have a timeline?
Yeah. Some people are complaining it's taking too long. Some people are complaining it's taking too fast. In terms of timeline, now that the momentum has shifted to Congress rather than in the CONCOM, because no appointments have been made, the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments, through the 4 TWGs, it intends to prepare a working draft of a federal constitution to be submitted to the CONAS. The CONAS is expected to be convened in January of next year.
Okay.
So I would think that they will take at least a year or less, maybe a year, to go through that because it's going to be tricky because they need to convene as a constituent assembly to be able to deliberate on this.
And they're still debating how they will count the votes, diba? Is it Senate voting separately and the House voting separately?
Yes, but there has been a gentleman's agreement between the Senate President and
the House
Speaker Bebot Alvarez that they will have to vote separately here.
Okay.
The senators will not agree to convene, to even convene as a constituent assembly, to begin convening.
If you don't have that
if we don't have that.
Okay.
So, because the first thing that the CONAS must do is to pass the rules of the CONAS. And the senators, I'm sure, will insist that in the voting, they must vote separately. And I don't think the Supreme Court will struck it down because the Supreme Court knows that our system is bicameral. Even the CONAS, even if it's the exercise of a different function, it's still bicameral.
So by January 2018, we can expect a constituent assembly.
Yes.
And then it will take them a year to draft this.
Yes, I think so. No, I think it's more of play by ear. No, but if the Constituent Assembly finishes its tasks by the end of next year, then maybe we can have a plebiscite by 2019.
Okay.
But my proposal is rather than put the Constitution as an adjunct to an existing election, for example, isabay daw sa barangay or midterm, I don't think it does justice to such an important document. The Constitution, the plebiscite, must be a different poll or election. Because if it becomes part of a midterm election, then it gets swamped. There will be no discussion. There will be people will still be concerned about who to elect as mayor, who as barangay captain. This will really lose focus. So, insofar as this study group is concerned, we would rather that we have a separate plebiscite or referendum just for the amendments to the Constitution.
But the temptation is strong to piggyback it on the midterm elections because you'll be coming up with a draft by 2019. So anyway, if and when it is ratified in 2019 or whatever year, what kind of transition are we looking at?
Well, to be honest, we have not really gone into the transition yet. We're just into the substantive matter. There hasn't been any final word on, insofar as we're concerned. As a matter of fact, in the draft that we presented to Congress, transitory provisions, nakalagay doon under study.
Well, if it's ratified in 2019 and then the Duterte administration has 3 more years, will 3 more years be enough for the transition period?
I think yes. I think to begin with the regional commissions, pass the regional local government code, and ask the regional commissions to convene, yes, it can be done. But I think the regular regional governments with a chief minister or a regional governor will have to wait until after the term of President Duterte.
The Constitution, the current Constitution provides for limits to ownership sa economic provisions like media, what businesses, land. Will this be affected under the proposed Constitution? Under
the proposed amendments proposed by PDP Laban, yes, we are proposing also changes to the economic provisions of the Constitution. It's been argued by many of our economists, that the restrictive provisions of the Constitution curtail foreign investment into the country, and the only way to really bring in capital to our country and such capital will produce employment is for us to open up this restrictive provisions. However, we put a line on land ownership. The PDP Laban has taken a stand, and the Senate President really stands by this position that ownership of land shall continue to be reserved to Filipinos.
Okay.
But the other...
but businesses and media, the current 60-40?
Yes.
How will that change?
We would rather that the regulation of these be set by law, by Parliament, rather than by a constitution which is so difficult to amend. So many of our proposals, insofar as the economic provisions are concerned, is not to remove regulation, but to give that power to regulate to Parliament.
Okay. And then the regional governments? Will they have power to set their own limits or not?
It would depend upon the division of powers in the Constitution. For example, telecommunications. If we are to talk about telecommunications, which I understand is a restricted industry. If we do give the exclusive legislative power to the regions, then necessarily it will be the regional governments who will have to decide. However, things like that I think should be left with the federal government. I don't see the need, if the National Telecommunications Commission, for example, is doing a good job, so why do you have to chop this to the different regional governments?
So parang it's like they set parang the standards, like DepEd we were talking about, the lean DepEd, setting the standards nationwide, and then the regional governments will just follow.
Yes.
Parang ganun.
Yes.
Okay. What are the chances of your draft constitution being adopted by Congress with no or at minimal tweaks?
Well, that's well, I don't really know. No, it's really federalism and this entire thing that we're doing. What the institute is doing is really an act of nation building. No? So when we present this to Congress, we explain to them that we feel that this is what we need at this stage in our country's history. If we do not do systemic change, we believe in systemic change. The argument that it should be a change of men. If we keep on harping on that, then we'll be stuck here forever. No? If we change the rules of the game, people will adapt. People will follow. But if we do not change the rules, then we're stuck with this system for a long time. So we just presented it as it is. There's a lot of work to be done. No? Many of our party mates in Congress, no? We have to discuss this with them and clarify this with them and get them on board. No? And just to get at least 50% of these reforms passed already is a lot of work already. So we hope that it will be adopted, no? But of course, there is no monopoly of wisdom here. We are just the think tank of a political party. They were elected by the people. So let's see. We're opening up to debate and discussion.
What do we expect from your consultations with Congress in the next weeks?
Congress is continuing to call various organizations. No? When we were called, for example, on the regional governments, the League of Provinces was invited, ULAP was invited, LMP, so all of those organizations. Next week, the DILG will be called also to give their inputs. No? So all of the sectors are being invited to give their inputs to Congress.
But I think the more important consultation should be happening at the grassroots. You've been going around explaining this in several local government units. But this, I understand, are upon the invitation of like private groups,
Yes.
NGOs. We're going to wrap up this Rappler Talk. I'll give you the floor to, I don't know.
The table.
Tell us about the information campaign, where you will be or where you want to speak, where you want to go so that this is explained better. And I guess address the concern about, are you only talking to groups that are pro-federalism? Do you have are you listening to people who have apprehensions about this?
Yeah. Well, precisely we came up with a draft because there's really nothing concrete to discuss. You know, in the past it's always nebulous concept of federalism. Now we have a draft. We have a starting point. So we really would want the public to take a look at it and see its merits. Insofar as the information dissemination is concerned, we've been going around, but when we go around not on a systematic basis. No? We would be invited to by some organization, by some local government, and we would go there. Just like last night, I spoke to the Rotary Club of Manila Bay. They wanted to hear about what the PDP Laban has been proposing to Congress. So it's really more of private organizations inviting us to explain. The American Chamber of Commerce invited us to speak to them and explain to them. And in the process of speaking, we get inputs. No? I have said this in Congress that this is not a perfect document. There is no perfect document, by the way. It's the constitutions are products of negotiation, consultations. No, I was asking Congress, how does the Federalism Institute envision to divide the Philippines into regions? And I said, I must be honest, we don't know how, because to do this, you must consult. And we do not have the resources to do an extensive consultation. So I challenge them. I challenge the members of Congress. Since you are government, you should be doing consultations on the ground and talk to Negros Oriental and Occidental, for example, if they still insist to become a separate region under a regional system.
Shouldn't you be working with the DILG on this? Recently, they had a memo to barangays saying that federalism should be discussed in the barangay assembly. But we deployed reporters and volunteers to observe these consultations, and the federalism discussion was, overwhelmed by the more local concerns because, it's barangay assembly. So shouldn't you be working with the ILG for a more strategic public information campaign?
Lately, we've been working with the DILG under OIC Secretary Cuy, Lito Cuy, and Secretary Lito Cuy designated ASEC Epimaco Dinsing of the DILG to be the overseer of the Federalism campaign. And what he did was to bring in the local government academy. So there has been a lot of workshops already with the LGA on common messaging. And the LGA is currently accrediting organizations who would wish to participate in the information dissemination campaign. So we are working with the DILG, and we hope that government through the DILG can continue to do more information dissemination campaigns, because we in the Institute, we're a very lean organization. We're more on the substance of the proposal, and we need people to, like Rappler, to reduce this to messages that people can understand, graphics or such other medium that can be used so that people get to understand, because ultimately, as I said, federalism must improve government service. And they must understand how it's going to impact so that if the plebiscite comes, they can make a right decision.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's Jonathan Malaya, Executive Director of the PDP Laban Federalism Institute.
Thank you, Gigi.
I am Miriam Grace Go. Please continue sending us questions about the proposed shift to federalism, and there will be more discussions. We've just started the debate. Thank you.